I'm grateful for the chance to speak and grateful for the accommodation to be able to speak remotely, actually. Um, uh, I'm someone with respiratory health accommodation related to air pollution, and I'm grateful for Stanford to uphold the Americans with Disabilities Act, which not many people realize applies to respiratory conditions. So if that's something you struggle with and you were unaware of that, that's a real thing. So today I want to really present some ideas that I'm developing here at Stanford, at Casbex, and invite you to think about these questions and help me work on a review article that I'm creating on this question of how we govern algorithms, especially in contexts where they adapt to human behavior. So I'm going to be presenting, and then I'm going to invite you to have a conversation with each other and with me in ways that hopefully generate ideas for your work and also for some of the research I'm working on here at Stanford. So if you click on that link, short URL listed there, and leave that open if you have a computer, do write down ideas as they occur to you as we have the conversation today. So this is where I want to start in 2014. After someone illegally broke into multiple celebrity photo accounts, people posted non-consensual intimate imagery to forums on the social platform Reddit. As people downloaded and reacted to the photos, Reddit's popularity algorithms promoted them to even more people. And those people kept the cycle going and even donated money in appreciation, earning Reddit more than $100,000 before the company banned the content a week later. Now, if you've not used Reddit before, here's a view of Reddit in September 2014 with the illegal images obscured. If you haven't ever encountered the site, like like other sites like Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, TikTok, the system presents a population of people with content, invites reactions and discussion, and incorporates that information into a ranking of content it recommends. Since these algorithms were first developed in the early 1990s for music, a whole subfield of computer science, recommender systems, reinforcement algorithms, now develop and validates these systems for use in stock trading, map routing, predictive policing, market mechanisms, and many other areas of society. And in an article on toxic technocultures, the communication scholar Edwin Messinari describes how non-human technological agents can shape and are shaped by human activity. During this really horrific episode, a set of powerful non-human technological agents, including Reddit's business model, its corporate policies, its popularity algorithms, were driving and being influenced by large groups of people in cultures with dehumanizing views of women, encouraged by the many thousands who viewed and spread this imagery without consent. Now, at the micro level, what does this cycle look like? When Lawrence's images were shared on Reddit, the platform's visual design showed people previews, enticing headlines, and popularity scores. Individual users were looking at them through the interface, seeing that they were popular, and upvoting and sharing them with others. And these collective indicators participated in a wider culture of misogyny that predates and is much wider than Reddit. And of course, the Reddit ranking algorithm observed this behavior and made it even more prominent through the visual design, pouring fuel onto an already active fire. Now, in any situation of mutual causality, it's difficult to attribute responsibility to a single part of the system. And it's hard to know if changing a single part will change the overall outcomes. Imagine, for example, that you ban or change the algorithm. Will that get rid of misogyny or prevent images from being circulated in this way entirely? And how are you going to cause millions of humans to behave differently towards women when many institutions and their business models actually depend on dehumanizing women? Facing these difficulties, a group of 17 social and computer scientists published an article in PNAS last year, pointing out that science does not have access to a theory-driven, empirically verified body of literature to answer questions about the effects of algorithms on society, or I would add, the effects of society on algorithms. And so that's what I'm here to work on during my year at Stanford, building bridges in theory and methods between computer scientists and social scientists to predict and influence feedback between human and algorithm behavior. And today I want to explain my research question in enough detail to enable you to share ideas and to inform my project this year. And I want to thank those of you who've already been responding to my tweets, to emails, and offered helpful feedback and references as I put this together. And I want to start by explaining how this fits into my broader work and the work of the lab I lead at Cornell, using a paper that I have under review. I then want to introduce the two projects for my year. One is this theory paper, and then another is work on an empirical research agenda. So as a computational social scientist, I can't put myself in the same kind of disciplinary box with an instant view of how I work as, say, a psychologist or an economist. I see myself like the sociable weaver bird of Southern Africa, which weaves contributions with others to create compound nests that support whole communities. Over the years, I've published papers in a range of scholarly venues across computer science, social psychology, with collaborations in science and technology studies, as well as law. My ideal research project achieves at least 2 out of 3 things. It answers a pragmatic question faced by communities, it advances theory, and it also contributes to policy in some way. How does that actually work? My approach to creating knowledge is inspired by what social psychologist Pelikan Cialdini called full cycle research. My version, which I call citizen or community behavioral science, it often starts in conversations with communities about issues that matter to them. These conversations prompt engagement with theory. We then carry out observations and analysis together of the world, which then leads to collaborative field experiments, randomized trials together with communities, which we interpret with communities to contribute back to theory. And this is all supported by novel research infrastructure that makes fundamental contributions to the computer science of how we design software for social research. And I do this work alongside the Citizens and Technology Lab at Cornell, an NGO-like research group that organizes citizen community behavioral science on digital life. To show you what this looks like in practice, I want to share a study that really first led me to think about this human algorithm governance dilemma. In 2016, I was approached by volunteer moderators of the World News subreddit community on Reddit, a group of over 14 million subscribers who organized to share global news. The community uses Reddit, but like all subreddit communities, are independent from the company. Their international team of over 70 moderators has facilitated discussions and created their own policies since 2008. Now, here's a story that someone posted to the World News community in 2017. Now, almost everything about these headlines was wrong. The man in this particular case of alleged terrorism was a Spanish national. He had a mental illness. He was not speaking Arabic. And unfortunately, the World News community receives dozens of articles like this every day. And some of them become so popular that Reddit's algorithms were promoting them to even more people. And of course, managing that problem was taking a lot of work. Now, this community also had a policy idea, something they thought could help. Can we encourage readers to question news from inaccurate sources, they asked? They also had some uncertainty. What if their policy solution had an unintended side effect of causing Reddit's algorithms to promote that news even further? How might a social or computer scientist think about this question? Now, scholars have studied misinformation by trying to correct it at several levels, looking at how people develop and change our beliefs, studying the social structures that shape the spread of information and people's perceptions of it. And online, these perceptions, beliefs, and social structures are all interrelated with the actions of algorithms. Managing misinformation requires more than influencing people. It now involves influencing algorithms. So how have scholars tried to create knowledge about humans and algorithms? Lab and field experiments in human-computer interaction, communication, psychology often look at the effect of computer-generated stimuli on individual behavior and beliefs. And of course, computer scientists sometimes study the mathematics and the design of the algorithm code using proofs, simulations, and more recently, even agent-based models. Ethnographers in communication and science and technology studies have watched people and algorithms interact and developed new ways to talk about these interactions. And much of this scholarship, not all of it, adopts or critiques a kind of technological determinism, assuming one-way flows of influence from software engineers and training data to software design, and from software then to human behavior. But in my conversation with moderators of the world news community, I realized we needed a further kind of knowledge. They wanted to influence the algorithm. Now, if algorithms can influence human behavior, how might someone actually influence an algorithm? Computer scientists often focus on direct influence, right? The software engineers who create it, the data standard creators who define what it's able to know, the training data sets that sometimes steer its early actions. But adaptive algorithms are also designed to be indirectly influenced. Their function is to observe human behavior and react accordingly. So influencing adaptive algorithms in some sense isn't hard. They're designed for that purpose. But what's hard is systematically influencing them and predicting what will happen next. When the world news community asked if encouraging fact-checking might make the articles trend on platform algorithms, here's what they were worried about. If someone posted inaccurate news and the community suggested volunteer fact-checking, what would happen if people actually went ahead and fact-checked the articles? Let the news aggregator notice, interpret skepticism as popularity, and then promote inaccurate news? Now, anthropologists have studied these intuitions, describing them as folk theories that often differ from the underlying mechanisms of an algorithm. Now, in citizen and community science, we treat these intuitions as testable hypotheses. The community was wondering about something that engineers and behavioral scientists at the time had studied, that since human behavior influenced algorithm behavior, attempts to influence human behavior might also have downstream effects on those algorithms. And as a community with no power to directly change the software code, they wanted to know what kind of power they might directly exert in this situation. To test this idea, I designed software to respond whenever someone posted a new tabloid article to the community. In the control group, the software made no suggestions. In a treatment group, it suggested fact-checking. We also had other interventions, and there are more details to share, but today I'm going to just give you the broad outline. I then observed two outcomes. The first was whether people included links to further evidence in their comments. I also monitored the promotion of articles by the Reddit algorithm, as measured by their rank position over time. The study found, as expected, that encouraging people to fact check did increase fact checks. That kind of nudge is not very surprising. The more interesting finding looked at the downstream effect on the Reddit algorithm. This chart shows the average treatment effect on algorithm behavior at a given moment over time in the first 7 hours after an article was posted. For people who don't do quantitative research, like if the wiggly dark orange line is below the horizontal black line at 0, an intervention reduced how much the algorithm promoted something over time. Across hundreds of discussions, articles that received an encouragement towards fact-checking were demoted in the rankings by up to 24 rank positions on average compared to the control group, enough to move them off the community's front page. Now that's good news for the community. Based on this knowledge, the community could make a clear decision about what to do without having to convince the company to change their software. So how might this help us answer the question about governing misinformation posed by that group of scientists? The community and I showed that people can influence the behavior of an adaptive algorithm in helpful ways without access to the underlying code through systematically coordinated collective action. And in the longer paper under review, I show how experiments of this kind can also help us think about why we see these effects, potentially guiding future interventions. But should the community keep doing this in the future? There's a problem. Robert Kitchen and many others have written about the challenge of making scientific discoveries or any kind of reusable knowledge about algorithm behavior. These systems are frequently written by their creators, and their behavior is contingent on changing surroundings. So can we really say that the findings of the past study will be useful for guiding future interventions? Since we did this, Reddit has changed their algorithm multiple times. Will this effect still hold in the future? I don't know. That is the moment. The moment I realized that was the moment I started thinking about this dilemma of governing algorithms. If we can't make general discoveries about human and algorithm behavior, what does that mean for our ability to govern these systems? I should also mention briefly that field experiments like this require novel computational research infrastructures. As our lab develops these studies, we also publish open software and computer science research about the design and evaluation of industry-independent methods to study digital life. In addition to journal publications, our work on research infrastructures has twice been honored in the field of design for being some of the best designs in the world in a given year. So let's talk about this algorithm governance dilemma. This study got me thinking about the question of whether the community should adopt the policy they tested and what kind of science they might need to make wise decisions. This fall and this year at Casbus, I'm working on a review article to try to summarize this dilemma, something I hope will help motivate computer scientists and social scientists to work together on this question. So as I talk more about the broader challenge, I would very much welcome you thinking about, writing down, and engaging with the knowledge you have from your corner of research that might help illuminate this question. The puzzle of human algorithm feedback is urgently important in many of the issues scholars at Stanford I know are working on. Just to name some examples of the areas where this applies, in Algorithms Oppression, Sophia Noble documents how search engines respond to prejudiced information supplies and search behavior to amplify prejudice and stereotypes. Scholars like Avriel Epps-Darling have documented the impact of algorithmic racism on the mental health of teens from marginalized groups, an issue the White House incorporated into its mental health strategy this year. Scholars, including Lisa Nakamura and William Fry, have theorized how algorithms contribute to the racial socialization of white Americans. And beyond cultural and social issues related to prejudice and discrimination, we can think of many other contexts. Market mechanisms and behaviors create algorithm wage discrimination, empirical work that Eileen Kaliskin and others have done, adaptive algorithms that cluster people based on preferences, and the behaviors of governments can affect the lives of people like Wilmer Catalan Ramirez, who was wrongfully incarcerated, partly due to Chicago's predictive policing algorithm. And they also affect markets at moments like the 2010 flash crash, which allegedly resulted from the behavior of algorithmic traders, and which led to the arrest of a British trader and a complete ban on the kinds of algorithms he used. But even as we worry about the risks, society has also seen beautiful examples of humans and algorithms that cooperate to spread generosity, grow human understanding, and develop transformative citizen power. There are people who are alive and healthy today and who live in hope of a more just society, thanks to the benefits of feedback loops between humans and algorithms that also happen to be capable of tremendous harm. So in the article I'm working on, I try to introduce this problem and puzzle of generalizable knowledge and why it matters. And this new piece builds on a review article I wrote with Lucas Wright early this year about social justice and algorithm governance that we published with the Social Science Research Council. This dilemma is about the consequences for democracy of learning whether a theory-driven governance of algorithms is possible or not. And that is a conversation that goes back hundreds of years. This is a picture from Robert Boyle's New Experiments in 1606, which established the dream that scientists seek repeatable knowledge, developing testable hypotheses validated through reproduction and demonstration. And this kind of generalizable knowledge, if it could be obtained, would also be pragmatically valuable. If we could describe, predict, and reliably change the behavior of humans and algorithms, we might be able to govern our complex world more effectively. In one view, as I mentioned before, maybe algorithm behavior isn't science. If general knowledge is unattainable, then general policies might be impossible. But maybe that's a good thing. In 2019, Sendhil Mullainathan argued that if algorithm behavior is more easily changed than human behavior, quote, biased algorithms are easier to fix than biased people. You might spend a decade, like Sendhil, failing to resolve a discrimination problem in human institutions, or you can delegate power to a computer, reprogram it to stop engaging in discrimination. If Sendhil is right, the moment you change the algorithm, past knowledge about its behavior becomes obsolete, and you have a fresh start on getting things right, so long as algorithm creators do the right thing. But if some people believe that human behavior is predictable, and algorithm behavior is not, some computer scientists who study adaptive algorithms have another view, that algorithm behavior is predictable, but humans are not. Consider engineers interested in a particular notion of fairness. These engineers might create or train a system to be initially fair that could become unfair over time, or it might move towards a more fair state, something that computer scientists are not easily able to predict because both human and system behavior are dynamic over time, as Michael Ekstrand and a number of others have argued in their monograph on fairness and discrimination in information access systems. Companies agree they can't predict the behavior of their algorithms because humans are unpredictable. Last year, Meta head of policy Nick Clegg argued that the company has less power to influence their own algorithms than regulators think. In a post about feedback loops, Clegg suggests that since Facebook's algorithms are effectively held hostage to the unpredictable actions of Facebook users, effective governance does not rely necessarily on holding Facebook's algorithms accountable, but instead requires more surveillance and regulation of human behavior, basically to protect Facebook's algorithms from the public. That's one reason the company invests over $500 million a year in content moderation, surveilling the digital behaviors of billions of people and using often unreliable enforcement algorithms to make instantaneous decisions about what behaviors to allow or not. I don't have time today to speak about my lab's work on automated law enforcement, but happy to meet up with folks and talk more about that work later. So if you haven't seen one of my talks before, then I want you to take a moment to guess what this machine does. Because monitoring humans isn't the only option in a world where generalizable knowledge is hard to obtain. This is actually one of my favorite machines of all time. I'll give you another second to think. If we were in the room, I'd ask for guesses. So this is actually a sock testing machine used in the 1930s by Consumer Reports, a member organization that does testing, journalism, and advocacy for consumer protection. This machine applies consistent amounts of friction to a large number of socks to find out which ones are the most durable. It's amazing. Now let's ask ourselves, is knowledge about human sock interaction repeatable? If I test a random sample of socks on this machine, will I be able to predict the reliability of future socks? Or will I have to test every new kind of sock on the market to give you assurances about sock reliability? In a way, Consumer Reports was founded to address the limitations of general knowledge in the world of consumer protection through the creation of sock accountability technologies, or sock transparency and accountability technologies. Let me know if you want to start a new subfield of computer science dedicated to the study of socks. So in the journal article I'm working on, I want to position this broader question in relation to two ideas about the role of science in policy that I hope you all will help me theorize better. You know, like all binaries, like the world is more complicated than this, but I hope it offers like two poles along some spectrum or other structure that we'll need to govern systems effectively. So on one hand, if it's possible to derive general principles, then algorithm policy would look something like what I imagine economists think economic policy should look like, right? We build policies around general principles and update those policies from time to time as new, more accurate theories arise. But if prior knowledge is invalidated every time companies make a change, or each time an algorithm encounters unexpected circumstances, we need to govern algorithms at an unprecedented speed and fidelity. We need tests and standards, infrastructures for continuous monitoring, and we'll have to guess intervention outcomes or evaluate them rapidly as crises are unfolding. In the meantime, we may have to ban certain kinds of algorithms, or if the history of consumer protection is any guide, debate the acceptable losses from continuing to use profitable systems that we know cause terrible and irreversible harms. So as a paper, this project on the algorithm governance dilemma will connect the open question of human algorithm behavior with the kinds of governance regimes that our answers steer us to. It'll also discuss the methods and systems we need to learn the answers. Computers, and I want to go through some of the methods that people are thinking about and that I've seen from research across multiple fields that I think offer some hope and promise. For example, computer scientists are investigating whether it's possible to simulate or model the conditions that algorithms will face in the future before putting them into the world, a debate that could be better informed by historical arguments in the social sciences about cybernetics, complexity theory, and agent-based modeling. Some social scientists have conducted longitudinal panel studies to observe this mutual causality. And one example is a project I'm on the advisory board of, a NSF grant at Northeastern University to create an observatory for online human and platform behavior that's developing this kind of research. Another exciting idea is to observe populations of algorithms to see if very different adaptive algorithms nonetheless behave similarly, as researchers have found to be the case with xenophobic search engine results and wage discrimination in market pricing algorithms. There's a contribution to be made from organizational behavior as well. I think of the work by Robin Kaplan and Dana Boyd about how business models drive organizations to create certain kinds of algorithms, putting bounds on what those algorithms can do and how they can perform. A third idea is actually to study populations of contexts, as Hagar and Shah have done in a new paper just in the last few weeks that studies the same algorithm as it adapted to multiple contexts. CatLab has also published research about software to support large-scale citizen science studies for similar purposes. But many governance questions are also about causation. What can we do not just to explain, but also to prevent and respond to problems as they arrive? We have very few lab or field experiments that look at human algorithm feedback, partly because these experiments are so challenging to design. In addition to the study I mentioned earlier, and a few more in prep, William Brady at the Crockett Lab has combined simulations with lab experiments to ask similar questions in a more controlled environment. I should also note that, especially when we start talking about field experiments and the challenges of testing something in the world versus simulation, this question about research methods also overlaps with the ethics of proliferation. When should we test things in the lab? When do we test them in the field? When is it right to consider the behavior of a system under those different conditions? These are questions that have been widely debated in ecology and epidemiology. And of course, all of these methods have politics. The algorithm governance dilemma is also a dilemma relating to power and expertise in democracies. And here's where this project connects back to the history of science. As Chapin and Schaffer argue in Leviathan and the Air Pump, the very idea of generalizable knowledge depends on the instruments we use to ask scientific questions, as well as the politics of science. The authors show how Boyle's idea of the experiment and the laboratory draw boundaries around who gets to ask questions, who gets to learn the answers, and who has to live with the consequences. Issues that we think deeply about at CatLab as we try to broaden who creates science and who science serves. Whether we find generalizable knowledge or have to rely on situated knowledge based on continuous monitoring, society still has decisions to make about the politics of the instruments we create to understand and govern algorithms. Should we rely on companies to monitor and enforce policies on humans at scale? Should we create infrastructures like the SOC tester to evaluate algorithms at scale? How do we do that in ways that protect people while preserving civil liberties? In the case of scientific governance, do we rely on behavioral science teams inside companies to carry out millions of secret experiments and hope they do the right thing? Can we build an independent research ecosystem that enables the public to answer these questions independently from industry with standards of ethics and consent? The questions of how to engineer these scientific instruments and what kind of knowledge we can produce about human and algorithm behavior are absolutely political questions. And that's what I'm working on describing in this review article. to review the state of knowledge and potential directions for scientific inquiry in ways that incorporate the political and ethical considerations that are ultimately at the heart of why we do this science in the first place. So I very, very much welcome questions, critiques, and suggestion of literature. I want this work to reach a broad audience of scholars across multiple disciplines. And I also know that creating any work that people see as reflecting, the state of knowledge, and also creating a compelling and exciting call for new research is always an interesting dance. So any questions, doubts, ideas, hopes, and enthusiasms are welcome. So I want to end with a few comments about the empirical research agenda I'm working on myself and for my own research lab. At Cat Lab, ideas start when we gather with affected communities, from digital networks like those on Reddit to place-based communities in New York City to participants in the global Wikimedia movement pictured here. This particular participatory and ethnographic work is an important starting point for our research design. And whenever I collaborate with someone, it usually starts by inviting those scientific collaborators to meet with communities, to hear from them about the things they care about. Another source of collaborators is an organization I have recently co-founded that just launched about 3 weeks ago. The Coalition for Independent Technology Research already has over 100 members across journalism, civil society, and academia, and is coordinating broad, diverse collaboration among industry-independent groups that study technology and society. And I would invite you to join or ask me about the coalition. Here are some of the studies we're working on. In one study in prep, we did observational research with the community to notice that conversations promoted by algorithms on Reddit receive thousands of more comments on average, and that those conversations also experience higher rates of online harassment. Based on that finding, we developed an experiment to monitor algorithms, predict harassment, and intervene in advance when we expected higher rates of harassment. I'm really excited to be analyzing the results of that soon. And in collaboration with William Fry, we're working with communities of color who identify attention whirlpools, or what we're starting to call savior swarms, parts of the social web that algorithms send people when news about marginalized communities is trending online. William Fry has observed that in the aftermath of police murdering unarmed Black people in this country, white internet users will flock to Black digital spaces looking for some context where they can talk about issues of race, largely because white Americans don't have many spaces for that kind of discussion. We're interested to understand what role algorithms play in white racial socialization and what kinds of interventions can direct that attention in productive directions. Another project has to do with the idea of algorithmic reparations that has been pioneered by April Williams. Every year, media publishers alter their algorithms to promote content from marginalized groups during special months like Black History Month, Hispanic Heritage Month, and Women's History Month. Jennifer Alciono at Cat Lab has observed that these are like exogenous shocks to the design of algorithms, where a whole population of systems are altered to carry out, with the goal of carrying out certain kinds of behavior. And so we're working on a project to study these populations of algorithms at moments when companies intervene to alter how they behave. So more broadly in the empirical research agenda I'm assembling, I'm going to be focusing on the research infrastructures needed to answer the kinds of questions. In addition to expanding our existing field experiment software and actually making it available to a broader group of scientific collaborators, which you should reach out if you're interested to do field experiments like this, because we're starting to build a community of practice to use our systems. In addition to that work, we're going to be developing systems for adaptive experimentation on algorithm behavior, where a research system monitors the behavior of an automated system in real time and adjusts the details of a study accordingly, a technique inspired by methods in ecology. Also considering software to guide collaborative hypothesis generation with communities, inspired by work being done by Vineet Pandey on crowdsourcing hypotheses. And in an area I'm kind of least sure about, but I'm thinking a lot more about this year, I've been thinking a lot about bridging between models in the field, finding ways to bring simulations and field experimentation together, making them more empirically grounded and informed by effective communities. That's probably the most out there still thinking area, so I'm especially excited to brainstorm about that. All of this will, of course, be underpinned by our continued work on research ethics and privacy for citizen behavioral science, including a report Cat Lab is writing on the topic this year for a consortium of several large US-based scientific funders. So to wrap up, I want to just point out human algorithm behavior, it's a hard problem for science and policy, and no single scientist will be able to develop a universal solution. So why focus on the science and politics of research methods, as I and Cat Lab have done? In the early days of the audio industry, nearly 1 million people had died in car crashes alone, in the US alone, by 1950. Yet policies blamed drivers instead of companies, focusing on speed limit enforcement rather than the design of injury prevention. This is Hugh DeHaven, a researcher at Cornell who designed some of the first reliable car safety test methods. For decades, people said that car safety was too complicated to test. You have all of these dynamics going on at the moment of a crash. DeHaven proved them wrong, showing that you could predict human injuries by measuring what happened to a test device like the one on the left in a staged crash. This work on test methods paved the way for citizen advocacy, government regulation, and changes within the auto industry for car safety. And in the subsequent decades, it's saved millions of lives. Today's tech companies and the tech industry are in a similar position to the 1950s auto industry. We know these technologies have dangers, but we can't fully create the knowledge to make them safer. If social scientists and computer scientists can even partially resolve the algorithm governance dilemma, we could do a lot of good for society. So that's the end of my formal comments, and hopefully the beginning of a conversation. And before you pose questions, here's what I'd like you to do. Take 3 minutes. If you're in the room with others, take 3 minutes and talk to the person next to you, and think about a question or an idea that relates to your research that intersects with this broader challenge of using science to govern algorithms and human algorithm behavior, and use that as a springboard for something that you could write in the document, or that you could ask or pose and share in the session. And as a reminder, here's the URL for accessing the shared document. Because even if we don't get to all the questions and comments, add your name, and then I can follow up, and I know the reference or the idea or the link that you shared. And if you're joining us remotely, maybe take a moment to think by yourself and do the same. So I'm going to turn on a timer, and then we can call on folks and go from there for questions and discussion. Okay, I'm starting the timer now. Okay, we are at 3 minutes. So I will let the folks in the room apply the excellent facilitation skills to queue up questions, comments, and participation.
I've never had my facilitation skills described as excellent before, but I will do my best. Okay, so folks, if you are interested in engaging, regardless of whether you wrote something in the document, please use the raise hand tool on Zoom. We will unmute you and we'll have a discussion. So please go ahead and start clicking on raise hand. Not everyone sort of signed their comment in the document, oh, I see. You put your hand up. So you want to kick us off. I'm only moderately good at facilitation, apparently. So go for it.
Yeah, absolutely. I hope my mic is okay, maybe? Awesome. So I wrote this in the document as well, but I'll read it out here. So building off of the idea that we have of the crash test dummy in the car accident, that's something that stands in for human beings that we can then measure impacts on and apply those impacts to human beings. I was thinking about some kind of, I don't know, a crash test form or crash test platform or website that these big companies might use to test out their algorithms, changes they make, moderation pipelines before they actually release them onto their actual platforms. I'm not sure if there's something like this in practice already. From my understanding, A/B testing actually in the in sort of the production environment in the real world is the most common way that companies try things like introducing new moderation tools or introducing new tools for adding context to articles or things like that. But obviously that can sort of cause an issue if they make changes that have the opposite effect and actually amplify things like misinformation, hate speech, impersonation, maybe to give an example from Twitter. So I was just curious if there's any work being done in sort of developing some kind of practical test space for that sort of thing.
Yeah, I love that question. A few thoughts. It's so generative. We could have a whole session just on that. The self-driving car world has done some of this work to create simulated environments to see how systems behave under those circumstances. Also, there's some work being done by Ellie Luccherini at Princeton, and I'm sure a number of others, to do some of the conceptual and formal work to define how simulations might be helpful in some of those contexts. One of the challenges is that your ability to manage that safety then is only as good as your simulation, and there's a risk of relying too much on it. The other thing I'll observe is that, and there's a whole literature on agent-based models and simulation and their external validity that has arisen in a number of other social science fields, and I'm really interested to do more reading on, particularly in economics. One thing I will note is that people sometimes think of, like, what people sometimes bring a deterministic viewpoint to the ethics of considering these technologies, right? If the concern is that if you introduce the technology, then it will unleash new kinds of hatred or harm, then you might have really good reason to hold back and do as much as you can to predict and prevent problems. But also sometimes there are certain problems that only occur when the ingredients fit together, right? That in context, the system will, gets used by a certain set of actors. And so as much as you try to red team something or simulate or anticipate problems, that is often where experimentation can be incredibly valuable. And rather than thinking of experimentation as a means to evaluate something, like one mode is where you use experimentation to evaluate something on a limited basis with a constrained number of people that you've calculated with power analyses and sample size estimation. And that has it's a valuable ethical standpoint in its own right. I think there's also scope for doing things that speed up the pace at which we learn how to manage things that are already in the world and are active harms. And that's one of the reasons why I'm more and more interested in adopting adaptive experimentation techniques, so that when something horrible starts to happen, you have a chance to rapidly learn how to manage it, even if you go into the situation not knowing as much about what to do. But I think you've identified one of the key questions, and particularly the way that it interacts with the debates about proliferation and when it's right to put a technology into the world, even if the goal is to learn the effectiveness of interventions.
Thanks so much.
Thanks.
I'll try to keep my answers and responses shorter so we can hear from more people. It's just such a good question.
A reminder for folks, please raise your hand. There are several possibilities in the document. I don't know if you're actually capable of unmuting without getting a huge audio loop. So chat at me if you want me to proxy you. I don't know. I wrote two things in the document. Nathan, I don't know if there's one or the other that seems more interesting to you. One's around sort of metaphors between human behavior and algorithmic behavior. And the other is sort of the tension between normative values and emergent behavior. Should we pick a topic?
Yeah, talk to me about the second one, because I'm not sure I fully understand it, and that makes it interesting.
Yeah, so normally when we talk about sort of governance, we look at where we think about where are the points of intervention, right? We can say when you sell some bubble gum, you must add the following tax or something like this. One trade-off that sort of was coursing through your talk from my take, and exemplified by the Nick Clegg article, but also these loops, these sort of causal diagram loops that were coming up, was that a lot of these outcomes are emergent behaviors, right? So they were not designed to do the algorithm, they were not designed to do the sort of human behavior, but they're sort of the result of the combination. And in contrast, when we talk about what we ought to govern or regulate and so on, we often take a far more normative or almost deontological point of view. We're like, we do not want, no algorithm should do this. It shouldn't push teen girls on Instagram toward bad body images. It should not be amplifying misinformation. It should not be facilitating harassment, right? So there's these fairly the thing that we're unhappy with is the emergent outcome. But you can't just directly legislate an emergent outcome. I mean, you could, I suppose, you could say, if this emergent outcome arises, you're going to get sued by the government or something. But it's harder because it's sort of because of the fact that it's emergent, right? It's coming up from all these different positions simultaneously. So I was just kind of thinking through as you were talking, where there might be analogies in other walks of life that are non-technological, where there's this sort of emergent outcome where human behavior doesn't intentionally, at scale, try to create this, but it does. And where do we intervene? I'm thinking of like the Fed as one place where this happens, but I don't know, I want to try to avoid sort of market metaphors. And I'm trying to think of other spaces where there's this tightrope we're walking between sort of like these normative outcomes we care about, but like the thing that we're actually trying to control is a collective emergent thing. I'm just looking for other examples of that in non-tech spaces.
Yeah, I thought such an important observation, Michael, and it gives me an opportunity to draw on my humanities training. So in some ways, this goes back to Thomas Aquinas, and some of the arguments about how we think about like what constitutes moral conduct in the Summa Theologica to like gloss a few centuries of Western philosophy. Basically, he's writing about, for example, violence, right? Do you consider the like ending of another person's life to be the problem, or the like sinking the knife in to be the thing you care about, right? And this is actually something that artificial intelligence researchers study when they do all of these trolley problems, right? To what degree is it the action that we care about, and how many steps far removed from the outcome someone is versus the outcome? And I think you're right that these are emergent behaviors, and when we think about regulation of like individuals, we do often think about like you can or cannot take X or Y action. But ultimately what governments care about are outcomes. And in theory, the social sciences have enabled governments to be able to think about, and societies to think about different kinds of governance that focuses on outcomes rather than means, right? Ends rather than means. And for an example would be education, right? Where we care about the outcomes on learning, right? And there are many, many interventions, and we hopefully engage in like an endless search for the most effective interventions to improve learning. Similarly, public health is another great analogy. Jonathan Zittrain has written about this. I've written a number of articles where the purpose of public health is to promote flourishing life and healthy well-being. And there are any number of interventions, right? During the pandemic, you mask, you distance, you take vaccines, and the goal, right, is policies that support like evolution in interventions towards those broader normative ends we care about. Ecology is also another area which I found really inspiring, because the environment is one area where we have sometimes competing actors that are generating emergent outcomes. And one great example would be the work of Eleanor Ostrom, who in her work as a political scientist described situations where you have community groups, fisheries, regulators, industries who share, who are in some cases polluting into waterways, and they're all optimizing for different things. And she was arguing for the kinds of evidence making that are needed to promote overall stability in an ecosystem in a context where multiple groups have competing goals. And her work has really inspired my thinking about citizen science, where citizen science has for a long time played an important role in moderating the excesses of these emergent behaviors in environmental management. So I think there are some really powerful analogies, and I think for this piece, I think some of the most helpful ones are going to come from probably a combination of public health / epidemiology, as well as ecological management, where there's been a lot of empirical work over the years. Of course, this, alongside all of the market-related work that folks have done. But yeah, I think the work that I do is particularly focused on ends. And I think the challenge we have with current regulations is that they're very focused on means, right? You have privacy regulation, which is about data and what you do with it, when ultimately what regulators care about is something very different from data. The final thing I'll say is that this is where the courts have an important role to play. Like, the tradition of tort law has often been much more focused on ends than means. And this is why we see attorneys general and strategic litigators taking up and seeking the kind of evidence that can anchor responsibility in the outcomes for people and societies, rather than debating like what happened at the desk of a particular software engineer or set of decision makers at a company on a given day.
All right.
More conversation to come.
Excellent. Yes, more to come. There's lots of other interesting stuff to chat about in the document, ranging from sort of what's the attack model, the analogy of the sock machine. They knew what the danger was. Can social science give us enough that we can sort of now expect that everyone should be able to protect against the following things? Questions around how this all comes together with capitalism, and are the critiques the same or different? Things around recommendation algorithms and so on. We're unfortunately out of time, so we're going to have to talk about that offline. But I look forward to the conversation, and I want to thank Nathan again for joining us from Cornell. And again, he'll be around if you want to chat with him.
Yeah, sorry I took so much time answering questions. It's such good comments, and I look out for the opportunity to hang out over lunch or otherwise. I'm really excited to meet folks, learn from you, see if there are ways that I can offer feedback and ideas for your own research and connect. Thanks.
And what's
everyone.
the best way for people to find you if they want to reach out?
So the easiest way, I'll share it on my screen again. It's my email address, nathan.matias@cornell.edu. And I'm also Nate Matias at social.coop on Mastodon.
All right. Thanks again, Nathan. And I think we'll end it here. Have an enjoyable rest of your Friday.